Hello people of the internet, and welcome to another Stairway Mountain time trial. Today is week 17 with a theme of convertibles, where we start off with a convertible pigeon. Yep, it's a interesting idea. It does slightly lower the centre of gravity. You'll see it's tipping over here, but I was unable to tip it on the flat surface of grid map. Here I kind of lose control of it a bit. And I don't believe this was the final one, but I do keep going because it just rolls onto its wheels. The joy of having a centre wheel, you dent the front corners up and it doesn't really affect drivability. I try and drive with a bonnet up, it doesn't quite work. Yeah, as I said about grid map though, it won't tip over because a lot of the time it just lifts the wheel but not to the point it's going to oversteer. You'll see you can go crazy, I can make mistakes and end up tipping it over. But a fair amount of time you can just drift it since it's losing grip from one of the tyres. Here's the high speed area, well about as high speed as you can get with a pigeon, and naturally with a bonnet in that state it's not reassuring. It's not reassuring driving a pigeon at these kinds of speeds to begin with, but you know, it's slightly less terrifying. Now I hit 90 miles per hour there. And 94, even, too much for the car really. Somehow I've not completely wrecked it yet though. That wall does, the rear axle took a lot of the damage. As long as you don't break the rear axle, the front wheel, the rear axle can take a lot of the hits, and the bodywork's generally quite tough as well. The pigeons are tough things. Somehow I avoided that sign, no idea how I did. Just a stroke of luck, I guess. And yeah, this is a Pigeon 600, so it's not as bad as that crazy 600cc vehicle I drove ages ago with a turbo. That's one of the worst cars I've driven, even with the turbo one that I tested later, the turbo drag that is. The standard 200 horsepower one, it didn't have the tyres to deal with itself, so that was a lot more of a mess than this could ever be. This will tip, but as long as you're very gentle around the corners, as long as you kind of know what you're doing, it's fine, you know. It's slow but acceptable for what it is. If you get the training wheels, further still it's helped from not tipping. And a lot of the time it will just tip onto the front corner. We've seen that before with the pigeons. So here we are at the end, and you'll see it's a bit smashed up, but really it took a lot. You've seen what I was going through. I think I did burst the front tyre sometime, but it kept driving, so I just continued, and that's good. So you know, not the quickest vehicle in the world, but it didn't do too terribly either. Now here we have the Gavril Grand Square Marshal, SQC, I believe standing for convertible. You can tell by the way the roof's wobbling there. Well, what there is of a roof on it. It's not really a proper convertible. You get the feeling someone just chopped the roof off a Grand Square Marshal. It's a nice vehicle nonetheless though. And it does have a fairly fruitless 96 horsepower engine. It does mean you're never overloading the tyres, but it means you come with something new for a Grand Marshal on this channel. Understeer. Now this thing feels like it understeers a lot, probably because it doesn't have enough power to overload the rear tyres. I mean 96 horsepower, I believe that's real horsepower we must say, but it's just not enough to really overload it. For what it is though, you know, it could be a lot slower. It's set an 8:37.45 time, which is just below a 90s Pessima stance, and just above an ideal car. So not a bad place for this. Again, I don't believe that's the final one, but I had to reshoot some of this stuff on the newer, updated Stairway Mountain, because I didn't want to have like two different versions of maps being used. Here we have some bumps. It does cope with bumps decently well. You know, again, because it's slow, it's not challenged as much as the faster Grand Marshals to overperform and really do what's beyond its capability. So even there I get things a little wrong. It's just underpowered enough to not overload itself. It will oversteer if I really push it round the corner. As you see here, you know, I did somehow get it to oversteer and just recovered from a wall tap there. And yeah, it's very hard to overload the rear tyres though, because there's so little grip available. Now as you'll see, because it was such a slow vehicle and really not that, how do I say it, aggressive to drive, it didn't pick up too much damage. Somehow the fuel tank got ruptured. That was when I kind of slid off the high speed curvy bit of road, but it kept going and it finished. The tyres do burst from the fire somewhere at the end, but overall it survived quite well. It was never made to be driven quickly, but when you do drive it quickly, it can at least cope with it. And that's a good thing indeed. Here we have the Burnside convertible. The V8 convertible, not the Supermatic or anything. Really, that's just a Burnside with its roof chopped off, but it does feel like it's what it should have been all along. I mean, these things are just so much more beautiful as convertibles. In terms of handling, it doesn't really throw up any surprises, other than it handles like a Burnside if you've never driven a Burnside before. So, yeah, it's not a bad vehicle to drive, but not perfect either, and somewhat underpowered. The time was an 8:33.2, which puts it in a fairly average edge of the leaderboard. Came below a Pigeon 4-wheel drive V8 race, weirdly. Yeah, I know, a Pigeon variant beat a Burnside. Slightly upsetting, but then these are cars from the 50s, remember, and considering just how old it is, and that it only has something like 150 horsepower, and weighs 1700 plus kilos, it's not bad at all. And it's such a nice car to just cruise around with. Obviously I'm trying to pull far too much speed out of it as I get a spin there. But it does drive okay. It's just more of a cruiser, and that's the feeling that you really get from it. And it beat a 90s Pessima Custom. Again, for a car from the 50s, remember, that is quite impressive. It's less powerful and heavier than that Pessima, and maybe even less controllable, so to beat it, it really does show it has some potential to it, some very decent potential indeed. Here we have the bumps. American cars never seem to have much trouble there. Only I somehow do have trouble because I'm not a good driver at all. Again, we have some more issues. The suspension generally filters it out. It's not as smooth as certain cars we've used. The Miramar was better, that's for sure. But it does get over the bumps without normally having too much of a panic. Almost tipped over there on the way to the finish line. That would have been a terrible place to tip it over. And it's like most cars, you know, if you go up a curve at crazy speeds, you can tip it over, but really just normal driving it's not going to. And you'll see it's much more beautiful than the normal Burnside in my opinion. I should have really got it in a more interesting colour, but I don't know, I got it in accountant's grey for some reason. Like some really exciting accountant is going to hate me for saying that, but it's just what you imagine an accountant driving. A grey luxury car. Here we have a similar car, which actually set a much quicker time than the Burnside by almost 30 seconds. It's the Moonhawk V8 convertible. Very similar name as well. And it feels like what the Moonhawk needed, really. It's a big bouncy barge with wood on the dashboard, so trying to have a hardtop sports car doesn't really work. It's just something about it seems so wide compared to the hardtop. Same story with the Burnside, it does feel like it deserved to be a convertible from the very start. Now the vehicles I've used are generally the quickest standard road going versions here, so I've not used custom or anything. That's probably why it feels right. I could probably have got a race convertible or something crazy, or built my own race convertible if there isn't a preset for it. But what would be the point, really? You don't buy these vehicles to race. I mean, I'm racing one just because I'm crazy, but you don't normally get a convertible with the intention of throwing it around a track, since the hardtops are usually stiffer and lighter and better at that stuff. What you do get a convertible for is just enjoying the roads and enjoying the sun, which is what this vehicle is really ideal for. I mean, handling, again, it handles like the Moonhawk. It's a ladder-framed muscle car, so you don't lose that much stiffness from the roof. The ladder's where the main stiffness comes from, so that's why it won't handle very differently. And it's a vehicle I like in its own way, but not necessarily something to race. As you say, you don't buy it for that. The time was an 8-minute 4.21, so it's not actually too slow. It's slower than the Supervan, but it just beats a Roma drag, and it just came below a Pessima 2-litre turbo, so it's up there with some decent competition, even if it was never designed for speed. And it's a time, you know, I'm quite happy with for what is a big luxury convertible barge, and not something I can complain about. Here we have a Covet ZXi convertible, which strikes me kind of like, you know, a budget convertible for someone who can't afford a beautiful classic Burnside. You'll see it handles like a Covet, makes about 100 to 105 horsepower, and it goes, as you might expect, a front-wheel drive with that power level to go. It's not crazy fast, but it's easy to handle and easy to drive. It doesn't look like a convertible from this view, but that's just because the roof cuts off past the camera. You'll see when I get to the end it is definitely a convertible. And I like the interior being beige. It's a little more interesting than the black interior. A little bright, you know. Since everything has a black interior these days, it's always nice to see something with some different colour, whatever it might be. The Moonhawk had red, that was also interesting. I mean, there's not much to say though. The convertible hasn't really affected the driving of this. All the driveline is in the front of the steering wheel. You see now is basically where the engine, transmission and driven wheels are. The rear just trails along doing its job, so this isn't going to handle any differently to the hardtop for that reason, unless it has serious stiffness problems, which it doesn't seem to have. So it drives like a Covet, but it is a nice kind of pootler if you're poor and you just want to pootle around in a convertible and pretend you're rich enough to afford a classic muscle car. Then for that it works, you know. Maybe not the nicest vehicle in the world, but you can get some decent speed to it. And I hear I have a crazy wall glide. I believe I slightly bend the steering up, but it's driving almost perfectly given what it went through with that wall. Here we'll see it's not as refined as the American vehicles that are handling with the bumps, but I do get through. And the most interesting thing of all, even though this kind of strikes me as like a budget alternative to the muscle cars, though you almost get a sign, it is quicker. It's a 7:57.5 time, which I believe is quicker than the sport vans. Yeah, it's actually right above the Gavril Super Sport van. And it has been beaten by front wheel drives. But as I say, this isn't built for speed, it's more for someone who wants a slightly sporty convertible hatchback, you know, and it works for that. Not the quickest vehicle in the world, but, you know, it gives you brisk pace down the hilly roads, and it's quite nice to drive. Here though, the muscle cars take victory for once. I mean, normally a Covet could embarrass them just because it's got that more compliant, sporty feel with the track, and it kind of coats the corners better. But this, although it is a big floaty barge, it does have a very low steering wheel and low seats, probably to lower the centre of gravity, and lovely grippy race tyres, probably the grippiest tyres of any vehicle I've tested around here. I mean, it's putting out 430 horsepower-ish at its best, and I believe that's wheel horsepower, as I've said. So it pulls it down amazingly. I mean, even when you lift one wheel, it still has tons of grip, because I don't know what these tyres are made of. Dried moon dust or something? They're just incredible. That's why it's become our quickest American vehicle. It's just so lovely, and it floats over bumps as you would expect an old Cadillac too. So much that it feels disconnected. That's what this car started as, so I can't really complain, you know. And it does do what it's supposed to. It goes quick round a track, or in this case down a hill. And as I said, it's floaty, so the bumps don't really pose a trouble, unless in that case I almost tip it over just by my terrible driving, really. That's not the car's fault. Here you'll see again, the floaty feel comes in. It never really feels aggressive along the bumps. It's never going to spike out on you. It's just because it's just so floating compliant. It just means it's really not near as sporty as something like the Covet. The Covet, you can feel everything it's doing. This you can't. So yeah, I really like this vehicle for what it is. I originally set a 7:30 time, but later, I believe on this one, I was able to get a 7:27.49. So I saved 3-ish seconds from my original time, which is good. And yeah, it's quick. It came above a Bolide 390 GTR and just below a Pessima Custom. But think of that for a moment. It beat an Italian supercar, and if that's not proof that this thing grips like mad, I don't know what is. You know, it's excellent. One of the quicker rear-wheel drive cars on the leaderboard as well. Now here we have the ETK KC6T Convertible. And since I lost it on my leaderboard, I had to say that from my mind. And it's an I-Series, as you probably picked up. It will snap out on you like that there. But it's generally a car you don't want to drive aggressively. I mean, I've banned the SC and traction control from this event, so you can't really use that to grip for you. So it has to be me being careful in order to get a good time with this. It's not super aggressive, it just feels like it needs grippier tyres on it. Like, if it had the tyres from that Cadillac, it would have been crazy quick, but it doesn't. It feels like it's got some cheaper road compound tyres which just don't grip in the way you'd like them to. As I say, with traction control, it may be a completely different story, but I don't use it, so I wouldn't know. It has got an ABS system though that works really well at slowing the car down, and it's really nice. It doesn't oversteer or understeer too much, it gives you just the right feel of braking, and the brakes are powerful enough as well to stop it. It's not as powerful as some other vehicles I've had, namely the ETK V12. That was something like 700 plus horsepower. This is about 450, I believe, maybe even less than that from the engine, not the wheels. And you know, it's a vehicle I kind of like. It's not like the rear-wheel drive one. The all-wheel drive one, sorry, would have excellent grip. This one doesn't have excellent grip, but it does have balance around the corners, as you would perhaps expect from a German sports car. The time was a 7:13.76, which puts it between a 80s Pessima race and a KC12ZR, which really, I guess, goes to prove you can't replace the balance of a car. The V12 version came just below it, despite having far more power and all-wheel drive. It just didn't have the balance, clearly, of this thing. And the balance has really helped it kind of, how do I say it, ballet dance its way around the corners, because it's a finer handling thing. And also the stiffness, I've not mentioned it because it handles like the hardtop. I wouldn't notice this was a convertible if it wasn't obviously for the visual stuff. It feels like a hardtop, and it loses its wheels like a hardtop as well. Yeah, It's a K-series, and it's incredibly stiff for what it is, you know. Remember, we've only got the floor, essentially, to keep it stable. Now, here's a surprise. Our fastest vehicle of the week. You won't notice the top of the windscreen, but you may notice the steering wheel and the dashboard and stuff. Yep, this is an SBR4 TTS2 convertible. And as you'll see, I will mess it up a little there, although it's not near as bad as I might have made it look. You know, I found this thing to actually be really nice to drive. Other than the odd messy bit like we had back there, it's a decent vehicle. You know, as long as you don't accelerate crazily, it will find grip. I'm not sure what that's all about. I'm guessing, though, that it's the chassis kind of acting like suspension where the suspension won't act. As in, taking a lot of the bumps. It does not have a lot of stiffness, unlike the ETK where that felt like the hardtop and was all the better for it. This feels far less stiff than the hardtop, and it's all the better for that, you know. It just doesn't feel as aggressive, you know. It puts the power down better and things. It's a very wobbly car. Don't get me wrong, I mean, the K-Series would be the nicer vehicle to drive in general. It's just got better balance and stuff. This you can mess it up, but as long as I was gentle, the very soft chassis would just wobble around everything as opposed to treating it like an evil thing that wants your car to spin and then listen to it and just get your car to spin. I mean, here you'll see again a place where we might have had issues, but it doesn't have any issues. You see, I'm just being gentle, but you can still carry the corner speed. You can still use that speed outright. And the time, well, nothing short of amazing for an SBR4, as I'm actually going through that quite nicely. A 6:55.26 time. Yep, is in the under 7 minute club. A place I never thought I would see an SBR4. If that's not proof this thing handles well, I don't know what is. It came just below the Pessima Hill climb. It's actually just over a second slower than that, so surprisingly close, and that's without all the fancy aero. Yeah. Just above the SBR4 Godzilla. So yeah, the SBR4s are slowly taking over their own part of the leaderboard. But seriously, you know, it proves if one of these is set up properly, they can be quick, but too often they're not. Okay, so thanks for watching, and until next time, goodbye until another day.